and Labour 261. So now both those parties have to begin talking about a coalition with smaller parties. It means political uncertainty. Theresa May called this election because she wanted a personal mandate. That has backfired, and there are already questions about how long she can stay on as Prime Minister, though she's announced recently that she won't resign.
At this time, more than anything else, this country needs a period of stability. And if, as the indications have shown, if this is correct, that the Conservative Party has won the most seats and probably the most votes, then it will be incumbent on us to ensure that we have that period of stability, and that is exactly what we will do.
She might have won the most seats, but it was supporters of Jeremy Corbyn, the far-left leader, who are celebrating this morning. And he will now also be looking at trying to form a government.
If there is a message from tonight's result is this. The Prime Minister called the election because she wanted a mandate. Well, the mandate she's got is lost Conservative seats, lost votes, lost support and lost confidence.
So a very fluid situation at the moment, though it does seem as if we're hearing the Conservatives might do a deal with the DUP, a Northern Irish Unionist party, and that might just push them over the limit. But political uncertainty here today in the UK. Back to you guys.
Yeah, it's different how they do it over there, but we're learning. All right, thanks so much, Benjamin.
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
And also breaking a lot of news, James Comey's testimony confirming what the president has said all along. He did not collude with Russia.
Yeah, this as the scorned former FBI director exposes himself as one of the leakers that's been wreaking havoc on the Trump administration.
That's right. Garrett Tenney is live in D.C. with the latest on the political drama, and there's a lot of it to unfold this morning, Garrett.
There certainly is, Robin. Jillian, good morning to y'all. The White House is certainly billing yesterday's hearing as a win, though, with James Comey confirming that President Trump was not the target of an investigation and repeating that as of the time of he was fired, there is no evidence of collusion. But Comey also had some strong criticisms of the president, even calling him a liar about why he decided to fire Comey. A lot of the questions senators had revolved around two meetings Comey had with the president, one in which Comey alleges the president asked for his loyalty, and the other in which he allegedly asked Comey to drop the FBI's investigation into Michael Flynn. The president has said neither of those ever happened, but even in his own testimony, Comey wouldn't say if he believed the president's actions amounted to obstruction of justice.
Did the president at any time ask you to stop the FBI investigation into Russian involvement in the 2016 U.S. elections?
Not to my understanding, no.
Did any individual working for this administration, including the Justice Department, ask you to stop the Russian investigation?
No.
Comey also criticized some of the media coverage surrounding the investigation, particularly false reports and information published by the New York Times, CNN, and others. In an exchange that seemed to even catch the senators off guard, Comey also admitted that after he was fired, a tweet by President Trump about there potentially being tape recordings of their conversations spurred him to leak one of his personal memos of the exchange.
The president tweeted on Friday, after I got fired, that I better hope there's not tapes. I woke up in the middle of the night on Monday night, because it didn't dawn on me originally, that there might be corroboration for our conversation. There might be a tape. And my judgment was I needed to get that out into the public square. And so I asked a friend of mine to share the content of the memo with a reporter.
And a source close to the president's legal team tells us that the president's attorney, Mark Kasowitz, is now planning to file a complaint with the Inspector General of the Justice Department over Comey leaking that memo. And this afternoon, we'll have our first chance to hear directly from the president about yesterday's hearings when he holds a joint press conference with the president of Romania. Robin, Jillian?
And there's some interesting stuff about the timing of when he leaked that memo versus when the president's tweet came out as well. Absolutely. All right. Garrett, thanks so much. We'll get into that later on. James Comey's testimony now raising questions about the way that he ran the FBI. Tucker Carlson slamming the fired FBI chief for folding to political pressure from the left during Hillary Clinton's email server investigation.
A month of shrieking hype, millions of words of ink, hundreds of hours of the shrillest television ever produced add up to pretty much nothing. We've got precisely as much proof right now that President Trump committed treason as we had 7 months ago when all of this started. But that doesn't mean we've learned nothing. We have learned some things. We've seen the FBI exposed as a political battleground, and that is not reassuring to us citizens. We've had the executive branch's effectiveness compromised by dozens of politically motivated leaks, many of them untrue. We've had the media uncritically cheer on what has become unambiguously an attempt to bureaucratically overthrow a democratically elected leader. It's been a total disaster, a man-made one, and it's hard to see who outside of Washington has benefited from any of it. We learned that while investigating Hillary Clinton's private email server, Attorney General Loretta Lynch asked Comey to soft-pedal what was actually happening. She instructed him to call the whole thing a matter rather than what it was, an investigation. Now, that's political pressure if there ever was such a thing, but Comey went along with it anyway. But wait, there's inconsistent behavior here. Why did Comey agree to make untrue statements that echoed the Clinton campaign's talking points, he just admitted he did that, and then refuse to publicly say something completely true about President Trump, namely that he was not under investigation? Why did Comey make and then leak detailed memos about his meetings with President Trump, but apparently do nothing in response to the political pressure he received from the previous Attorney General, Loretta Lynch? And was this the only time that the Obama administration exerted political pressure on James Comey? We still don't know the answer to that last question, and it might be worth asking.
The president is not a liar. Strong words from the White House after former FBI Director James Comey repeatedly accuses President Trump of defaming him and the agency he used to run.
Yeah, Jackie Ibanez joins us now with reaction from the hearing. Jackie.
Hi, good morning, Rob and Jillian. Well, the White House is backing President Trump following former FBI Director James Comey's testimony. Deputy White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders making one thing abundantly clear. Listen.
I can definitively say the president's not a liar, and I think it's frankly insulting that that question would be asked.
President Trump's outside counsel also responding to the testimony. Mark Kasowitz saying it proves what the White House has been saying for months.
Mr. Comey has now finally confirmed publicly what he repeatedly told President Trump privately. That is, that the president was not under investigation as part of any probe into Russian interference.
House Speaker Paul Ryan also coming to the president's defense. He says President Trump didn't intend to break protocol by speaking directly to Comey.
The president's new at this. He's new to government. And so he probably wasn't steeped in the long-running protocols that establish the relationships between DOJ, FBI, and White Houses. He's just new to this.
The president's son, Donald Trump Jr., says now that the hearing is over, his father can go back to doing what he promised to do for America.
There's no clouds, there's nothing getting in his way, they can't be obstructionist. He can go back to doing the things he said he was going to do for the American people, putting Americans back to work, putting America first.
According to President Trump's lawyer, he feels completely vindicated. Rob, Jillian, back to you guys.
Oof. A lot of information coming out of yesterday, that's for sure. Thanks, Jackie. The mainstream media once upset with James Comey over how he handled the Hillary Clinton email investigation, but they're now relying on the former FBI director's testimony to help make their case against President Trump.
There is no other way to walk away from Comey's testimony today without thinking that the former director of the FBI thinks the President of the United States is a liar.
The assumption of the critics of the president, of his pursuers, you might say, is that somewhere along the line in the last year, the president had something to do with colluding with the Russians. And yet what came apart this morning was that theory.
He might not be a Democrat, he might not be a Republican, but boy, is this guy political. He's not just a Pollyanna Boy Scout. He wants to affect something.
The New York Times suggesting the mainstream media's about-face on Comey can be summed up by an old saying, quote, "The enemy of my enemy is my friend."
Okay, breaking news from overnight. Police not ruling out terror after a speeding truck plows into two police officers. This horrifying scene unfolding in Washington, D.C. Police say a white pickup truck mowed down a city worker and two cops on bicycles before it smashed into an empty garbage truck. One of the officers fighting for their life at this hour. Both the driver and a passenger in that truck behind bars.
Two American men accused of leading double lives, living as regular Americans and terrorist operatives for Hezbollah. Investigators say they scouted potential targets for attacks, including New York's LaGuardia Airport and the Panama Canal. The two men from New York and Michigan charged with providing material support to that terror organization. They are both naturalized U.S. citizens and face up to 20 years in prison.
Well, the government contractor accused of leaking top-secret NSA documents also wanted to burn down the White House. Reality winner denied bail after pleading not guilty in federal court, a judge calling her a danger to the nation after prosecutors revealed handwritten notes about plans to join the Taliban and destroy the White House. Despite telling her sister she'd play the, quote, pretty white and cute card to get out of trouble. Wow. Winner is charged for leaking a report about Russian interference in the presidential election to an online news outlet.
How about this? I'm still the luckiest guy in the world. No, that's not me saying that. President George H.W. Bush tweeting a sweet message to his wife Barbara on her 92nd birthday.
That's something else. The former first couple have been married for 72 years.
Oh my gosh.
I hope I live that long. President Bush celebrates his 93rd birthday on Monday. That's something else.
It is 11 minutes after the hour right now. James Comey afraid the president might lie?
And then the nature of the person. I was honestly concerned that he might lie about the nature of our meeting, and so I thought it really important to document.
Why our next guest is a former head prosecutor who says Comey's own words actually helped just make the president's case.
And he's ready to risk his life to protect ours and the country. So why can't this high school grad headed for the Marines accept his diploma in that new uniform? We'll talk about that.
Former FBI Director James Comey saying during his 4-hour testimony yesterday that he wrote memos about his meetings with President Trump because he couldn't trust the president.
That's right. Bob Bianchi is the former head prosecutor from Morris County, New Jersey. He joins us now early this morning with reaction to the testimony. Bob, thanks so much for coming on. I won't say that it was a great day for the president, but it did seem that there was some vindication there to some extent.
It depends on what point of view you're going to be looking at it. From a political point of view, it could be somewhat problematic for him, but I only look at it from a legal point of view, not a Democrat, not a Republican point of view. But what James Comey essentially was saying was there was enmity or distrust between these two individuals, and that he started documenting conversations, but he made it very clear, and we would know as the head of the FBI, if he had felt that anything that President Trump was doing was illegal, then they would have opened a file for obstruction of justice, and he didn't do that. I say the day before, based on the testimony Comey gave, legally was very good for Donald Trump, President Trump. It's the actions that occurred after Comey was fired that became a little bit more problematic for President Trump legally.
What specific actions are you talking about?
Well, there was never a connection, and there was not an investigation. And one of the things that was striking to me with Comey's testimony was that the president, understandably, and I represent clients, and as a former prosecutor I get, he wanted it to get out that I'm not under investigation because it was clouding his ability to do his job. That is a very legitimate and understandable basis. But when, after he fired Comey, taking in the law what we call mens rea and actus reus, an actual act, and then followed up with tweeting that it was as a result of taking pressure off the Russian investigation, and gave the Lester Holt interview indicating he was fired because of the Russian investigation. He then made a connection between a thought, the Russian investigation, what was going on there, and an action, firing Comey. And that, in my mind, caused the FBI, I would have no doubt in my mind, as a former head prosecutor appointed by the governor through the Senate, the same way Comey is, opened up an investigative file as to whether that firing was motivated due to try to quash the Russian investigation.
Yeah, that certainly does seem like a problem. It could be a problem. Let me ask you real quick about, I mean, this whole thing started with Russia, right? We find out through Comey's words yesterday that he doesn't believe President Trump had anything to do himself with Russia. But now we're talking about obstruction. So now we're on to this next topic that the president could be in trouble for. Do you buy Comey's reasoning for not reporting what now he's insinuating could have been obstruction at the time? Because now this all comes out. He had so many opportunities to try and report this before yesterday.
Yeah, I know the public is confused by this, so I think that we have to understand the nature of the relationship that Comey has. And in fact, yesterday there were even comments by many Republicans about this. You're in a black box when you're an FBI person or a prosecutor. You get appointed through the political process, but once you're through it, you're supposed to be independent and uninfluenced at all by politics. And Comey was put between a rock and a hard place with that. So he starts documenting these things because, based on his testimony, which I found to be credible, if later on it becomes relevant, he has that information. But what he made very clear, in my mind, was that he did not believe that there was obstruction, that he was not under investigation. And to be honest with you, as the boss, President Trump being the boss, when he says, I want you to put out there that I'm not under investigation because it's compromising my ability to do my job, for the life of me, I can't understand why that wasn't done. I think that was a very reasonable request.
Bob Bianchi, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
All right. Thank you so much. More analysis of all this coming up later in the show. There's so much to talk about. 19 minutes after the hour now, millions of dollars in taxpayer money wasted on these now determined illegal signs. And guess what? Lawmakers knew the entire time.
And as if you cared what they thought, Hollywood snowflakes chiming in on Comey's testimony. Carly Shimkus here with the top 3 trending moments on Twitter. Just 3, Carly?
You're absolutely right.
Millions and millions of people taking to Twitter even hours before ousted FBI Director James Comey was grilled on Capitol Hill.
Carly Shimkus with Fox News headlines 24/7, Sirius XM 115, here with the top 3 most tweeted moments.
That's right.
It's probably hard to whittle this down.
I know, right?
Did you know that 3.6 million tweets were sent out about Comey's testimony between the hours of 7 a.m. and 1:30 p.m. yesterday, which is a huge number. So what are some people on social media talking about the most? Well, Twitter says that the top trending moment actually had to do with Senator John McCain and what some are considering a confusing line of questioning. Take a listen.
So you got one candidate who you're done with and another candidate that you have a long way to go. Is that correct?
All right, so Toki on Twitter says, I'm still mildly sedated by his babbling. Did I mishear, or did McCain seriously say President Comey at one point? So Senator McCain actually responded to this confusion in a statement. He says, maybe going forward, I shouldn't stay up late watching the Diamondbacks night games. What I was trying to get at was whether Mr. Comey believes that any of his interactions with the president rise to the level of obstruction of justice. So there you go. Now, as for the second most tweeted about moment, folks on social media had a field day when the former FBI director said the word Lordy.
I've seen the tweet about tapes. Lordy, I hope they're tapes. I remember saying, I agree he's a good guy, as a way of saying I'm not agreeing with what you just asked me to do.
Lordy, that's a first. I don't think I've ever heard that before, at least in this modern era that we're living in. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary also got involved, saying Lordy in particular has received quite the workout today. But that is not the only phrase that has tickled Twitter's funny bone. Take a listen to Mr. Comey when he said this as well.
Yes, sir. There should be no fuzz on this whatsoever. The Russians interfered in our election during the 2016 cycle. They did.
No fuzz. So that's the third most tweeted about moment. Juan on Twitter says, Comey states there was no fuzz about Russia's involvement in the 2016 election. Time for a special election. So no fuzz, Lordy. Taking us back a couple decades.
Lordy,
Senator Comey.
Sounds like my grandma.
Yeah.
So what about the president's kids?
Well, you know, the president actually did not tweet during the hearing whatsoever, but his 2 sons certainly did. Donald Trump Jr. actually live tweeted the whole thing. He says, I'm pretty sure that Comey's testimony put his own character on trial. Leaks, admitted weaknesses, Lynch double standard. Coming on now. He closes that tweet off with this: 10 months of nonsense whose only apparent goal was to take down the president and stop him from doing, I believe, his job. And look at this. Eric Trump also responded saying, now let's stop this charade and get back to jobs, health care, taxes, infrastructure, our military, and making America great again. So no surprise there, guys. They spent their day, you know, defending their dad.
And as we have learned over the years, Hollywood not afraid to say what they think.
Can you believe it? Hollywood is mad at President Trump. Chris Evans on Twitter says, I've never wanted Trump to tweet so badly in my entire life. Pick
Pick your phone up. Do it. Do it. All right, and let's take a look at another tweet from him, if we can. Chelsea Handler, we'll get to them straight from the teleprompter, says Trump announced his new FBI director via Twitter. Can't wait for him to announce his impeachment via Snapchat. So she's kind of making fun of the president there. So let's get to some viewer comments. What do you think was the biggest moment from Comey's testimony? We want to hear from you. Let us know on Twitter and Facebook, and we will, read some of those comments later on in the show. There's a whole lot to choose from.
It's so funny because majority of people, the last few weeks anyway, have been saying we don't want Trump to tweet, and now people are saying we want him to tweet.
Yeah, where was he throughout this whole thing?
Pick what you want.
I have to say, I think my favorite moment from the entire thing was when he said that Trump ruined his dinner date with his wife. Oh my God. You can't forget that one.
And I promised we'd fix that crappy monitor.
Yeah, I'm really blaming you on this, Rob. Ever since you got here, things have been a little shaky.
Thanks, Carly.
Thanks a lot.
Good morning. It is 27 minutes after the hour right now. He admitted to breaking the rules, but somehow the mainstream media walked away with this takeaway from Comey's testimony.
The former FBI director told the world today that the President of the United States, Donald Trump, cannot be trusted.
The key word this evening, lie.
Well, some perceived liberal bias that you're going to want to hear. That's coming up. .5:30 on the East Coast. Straight to our top story. James Comey's testimony confirming what the president has said all along. He did not collude with Russia.
This as the scorned former FBI director exposes himself as one of the leakers trying to take down the Trump administration.
Garrett Tenney live in Washington with the fallout this morning. Good morning, Garrett.
Rob and Jillian, good morning to you. There was a lot we learned in yesterday's hearing. James Comey did confirm that President Trump was not the target of any investigation, but he also said repeatedly that he felt he could not trust the president and at one point called him a liar. Comey also refused to say whether or not he believed the president had committed obstruction of justice, and that is what Democrats were going after, as they peppered him with questions about a meeting with the president in which Comey alleges Mr. Trump asked him to drop the investigation into Michael Flynn.
Why didn't you stop and say, Mr. President, this is wrong. I cannot discuss this with you?
It's a great question. Maybe if I were stronger, I would have. I was so stunned by the conversation that I just took it in. And the only thing I could think to say, because I was playing in my mind, because I could remember every word he said, I was playing in my mind, what should my response be? And that's why I very carefully chose the words. And look, I've seen the tweet about tapes. Lordy, I hope they're tapes.
Comey criticized some of the media coverage surrounding the investigation as well, particularly false reports and information published by the New York Times, CNN, and others. But he also admitted that he himself leaked one of his personal memos after he was fired to push back against the White House's depiction of him. Now, apart from the Russia investigation, Comey also shed new light on the FBI's investigation into Hillary Clinton's email server and concerning behavior by then Attorney General Loretta Lynch that led him to leave her out of the loop when he announced the findings in July.
Was your decision influenced by the Attorney General's tarmac meeting with the former President Bill Clinton?
Yes, in a ultimately conclusive way. At one point, the Attorney General had directed me not to call it an investigation, but instead to call it a matter, which confused me and concerned me.
And in a bit of a surprise, as y'all were talking about, President Trump did not send out any tweets during Comey's hearing yesterday, but this afternoon, we may have a chance to hear his thoughts on it when he holds a joint press conference with the president of Romania. Stay tuned.
Rather hear that than a tweet. That'd be great. Garrett, thanks so much.
You got it.
Idaho Senator James Risch was part of yesterday's hearing. He says the former FBI director had a duty to clarify the president's comments on the Flynn investigation before going public, but his failure to do so has led to serious consequences.
The president said he hoped for an outcome. Now, Mr. Comey said, and Mr. Comey's a good lawyer, that he took it a different way. Look, this is the big leagues. This can't be mushy. If he thought the president meant something different than what he actually said, he should have said, well, Mr. President, exactly what do you mean? Or, Mr. President, are you telling me I should do this? You can't just sit and let this mush up. I'm a prosecutor. I prosecuted lots and lots of cases. You can't prosecute somebody for hoping something. It doesn't work. I've never heard of a case like that.
As Fox News contributor Charles Krauthammer points out, Comey treated the Democrats much differently than he treated the president in recent months.
The attempt of the Democrats to turn Comey into some kind of secular saint is not only hypocritical, it's laughable. He admitted his own cowardliness. He should have stood up and said, Mr. President, we can't do this. Or, Mr. President, I'll resign. Or, Mr. President, you know, I have to go upstairs to my boss, to the Attorney General, or to Congress and tell them what's going on here, because it shouldn't be. He should have done all of that. He didn't, but he even told us, as I said earlier, that with Loretta Lynch, he folded like a cheap suit as well.
Despite many of the revelations that came from James Comey's testimony, including the fact that the president is not currently under investigation, the media did remain focused on one thing.
There is no other way to walk away from Comey's testimony today without thinking that the former director of the FBI thinks the President of the United States is a liar.
The assumption of the critics of the president, of his pursuers, you might say, is that somewhere along the line in the last year, the president had something to do with colluding with the Russians. And yet what came apart this morning was that theory.
He might not be a Democrat, he might not be a Republican, but boy, is this guy political. He's not just a Pollyanna Boy Scout. He wants to affect something.
Here with more on the media reaction to Comey is staff writer for The Federalist, Bree Payton. Bree, thank you so much for joining us. Listen, a lot of the media said yesterday was a bad day for the president. Was it?
Yeah, I'd really like to know what hearing they were watching, because that's not at all what I saw. What I saw was a man who made it, when pressed about the issue, made it very clear that Donald Trump did not specifically ask him in any way to alter the investigation into General Mike Flynn or the investigation into whatever ties between the White House and Russia. I think it's very clear that James Comey acted like a spineless weasel, and he indeed called himself a coward about 4 or 5 times by my count yesterday. And I think it's very clear that he is spinning this rather elaborate narrative in an effort to cover his tail. I think it's very clear that his intentions are not for the good of the country, or not for the sake of transparency. And I think the media is covering that up and spinning a different narrative, because what really happened just doesn't fit their agenda.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that the president had a good day yesterday, but I think that Comey eviscerated everybody almost equally. He got Loretta Lynch even in there. He got the media in there, and he also got the administration in there as well. The New York Times article back from February regarding Trump officials meeting with the Russians, he said that was almost completely false. CNN ABC story that Comey would actually deny Trump's claim that he wasn't under investigation came out completely false. Is this tantamount to just bad journalism, or is this bias? I mean, did he identify a bias?
Yeah, well, I think what is clear is that a lot of the reports containing information from unnamed sources end up being wrong most of the time, right? And I think that that's something that James Comey pointed out during his testimony yesterday. And I think, but I do have to say, I think, you know, the memos that he supposedly wrote after these interactions with the president, that he leaked to his friend, that the Senate Intelligence Committee hasn't actually seen themselves, and a line of questioning made that clear yesterday. He leaked those to his friend, who then leaked them to a New York Times reporter, and that New York Times reporter hasn't actually ever laid eyes on the memos, right? So I think in the same vein that he is identifying a bias, I think he is also